joining. And allow me just first to thank JAMA, the IMA chapter in Jordan, for their efforts in organizing the event and arranging this webinar. By way of introduction, I'm Hesham El-Yafi. I'm a consulting supervisor at AIGC. I work mainly in the intersection between data, risk management, data analytics, risk management, and internal audit. And today I'll be giving you a small brief about continuous control monitoring and how we can leverage on it for not just internal audit, but for all users within the business. So what is continuous control monitoring? We've been hearing a lot about it, and in a general perspective, continuous auditing or continuous control monitors.
Sorry,
by
Mr.
term, it's
Mr. Hesham.
Yes.
If you can share your presentation.
It's not shared?
Not yet.
I thought it was. Sorry.
So they can follow up.
Okay. Now is it okay?
Nothing on the screen yet.
I shared it. Is it on?
Not yet.
Not yet.
On my side.
Now.
Yes, I can see.
Yes. Thank you.
So continuous control monitoring and continuous audit, they are both terms used in accounting work to describe the process of continuously monitoring an activity within the business, or whether it's monitoring the processes, internal controls, or systems, and looking for signs of deviation. So by its nature, CCM, or continuous control monitoring, is an ongoing repetitive assessment for control effectiveness that involves regularly reviewing the tests and objectives. It's a process of regularly reviewing whether they are performance indicators, activity-based indicators, or measures in order to make sure that our business is processing within the desired limits. If I would take a more formal definition, I would go to the IIA definition in the GTAG in 2005, which defined continuous monitoring as a process that management puts in place to ensure that its policies, procedures, and business processes are operating effectively. Let me just go a little bit brief about continuous control monitoring, or continuous monitoring in general. I think most of you would think that it's new and it's just started in the last decade, but then the reality of continuous monitoring goes a little bit further. The first signals of continuous monitoring, or the first time we started hearing about continuous auditing or continuous monitoring, was actually in the early 90s or the late 80s. And it was in a research paper developed at AT&T Bell Labs. And this paper discussed the use of continuous audit of online systems. And it mainly focused on how can we audit paperless databases. This was the first time continuous auditing as a term comes into the perspective. It wasn't the term continuous auditing as we know it today, or continuous control monitoring. It was CPAM or CPAS, which is continuous process auditing of systems, or continuous process auditing methodology. Later on, we started to move in the 2000s, where we had an emergence. Excuse me?
Sorry, I think A mic was unmute for someone.
Okay.
It's okay.
As soon as we moved into the 2000s, especially after the dot-com bubble and the Enron case, and with the emergence of Sarbanes-Oxley legislation, organizations were faced with an enormous pressure to ensure proper compliance with the new legislation and to ensure that internal controls that are in place are effective on an ongoing basis. And this triggered more and more organizations to look for better ways and better approaches to monitor their internal controls. And at this period of time, a lot of proof of concepts were internally developed, mainly to evaluate the uses of continuous monitoring in a highly systemized ERP environment. So a notable project that came in the 2000s was done by Siemens, where they started testing over 150 processes in their SAP system. And this case was mainly used as a reference for future case studies or projects as a reference for them. Later, we started in the 2010s, where I think all of us started listening about CCM, especially that general audit software providers and other service providers started developing their own platforms to evaluate internal controls continuously. These platforms were mainly characterized with them built in with a library of tests and testing scenario covering different areas, whether it's order to cash, hire to retire, procure to pay, other financial aspects, especially when it comes to general ledger. And this was mainly in the 2010s, how the continuous monitoring was evolving. We started seeing off-the-shelf softwares and platforms that are used by users, and therefore the thing became more evolving. We started hearing continuous monitoring more often. The 2020s, as we're living today, is a little bit more advanced. We started hearing about integration of different technology, whether it's about artificial intelligence, machine learning, or process mining in the continuous monitoring solutions. And that to move from the fact of audit being reactive, audit being detective of and reactive and detecting and uncovering exceptions, into audit becoming a predictive tool, which can prevent errors prior to them being occurred. And the new tools actually started to change from being the responsibility of audits, such as the previous tools, the general audit softwares, to being the responsibility of management. And that brings me up to the next topic, which is we're hearing continuous auditing and continuous monitoring interchangeably, but in reality, they are different. Continuous auditing, by definition, is a methodology that enables independent auditors to provide assurance on a subject matter using series of auditors report, and these are usually done within short period of time, identified within short period of time. The audience of the continuous auditing, or actually, if we want to say the ownership of continuous auditing tools, was usually the internal audit function within the organization. And usually the reports of the continuous auditing would include audit reports, would include compliance checks, and would include comparisons between existing period and previous period. While on the other hand, continuous control monitoring is an automated ongoing process that enables management to assess effectiveness of controls and detect associated risks, thus improving business processes and increasing cost effectiveness. Unlike continuous auditing, the people that are involved in CCM includes a wider scope of stakeholders. So we can see the management is involved, we can see We can see the finance function involved. We can see support functions, whether we talk about risk management, compliance, or even the internal audit are all involved when it comes to CIDA. In comparison with the reports that used to be generated from continuous auditing, continuous monitoring will include more exceptions that are automatically reported to responsible officers and dashboards provided to management to give them a status of ongoing remedial actions. So although they might seem similar, there are some kind of differences between both of them. But if we're going to talk about the similarities between continuous auditing and monitoring is, first of all, the frequency. Both continuous auditing and continuous monitoring are a continuous assessment of organization processes and internal controls. The scope, again, both are similar. We have similar scope. Both of them consist of a range of automated data analytics tests that collect information from different areas within the processes. Both of them collect information from transactions being processed within the organization. And both of them are integrated to company systems. In addition to that, both of them will require regular review and may sometimes require revision and refining of the tests to ensure evolving goals of the company are being matched. So in simple terms, when an organization has established a foundation of data analytics that are repeatable, either in the internal audit plan or within business function, the natural step is to then implement a frequent or a real-time process. So moving from just normal data analytics into a more continuous assessment. If this repeatable analytics falls within the audit scope, then we can call it continuous auditing. But then when the repeatable analytics occur as a feedback mechanism as part of management responsibilities, for example, finance are involved to check exceptions or duplicate payments, then the nature of this data analytics, we can call it continuous monitoring. And here we come to the first poll question. I think we're having difficulties to see the poll questions in
yes, there's a technical issue to display the poll question. Yes, so feel free to add your
comments in the chat, and I will check them out.
Yes, to the chat box.
What is the current challenge faced by your organization that will trigger the use of a continuous auditing or a continuous monitoring solution? Is it process inefficiencies or high number of waste being identified in the organization? Is it the lack of integration between existing systems? Whether just meeting up with never-ending regulatory bodies requirements? Is it about internal fraud and identifying internal fraud abuses or controls override? Inadequate human resources, then maybe we need to do continuous auditing or continuous monitoring to overcome and complexity of transactions. Which of them will trigger you to use continuous auditing or continuous monitoring solution?
You can only add the number instead of writing the answer. Yes. For last two items, number 2, internal fraud abuse control. Last item, increased sophistication.
So I can see a lot of
choices, yes.
A lot of the answers are spread, but mainly the majority of the answer came in number 2, which is lack of integration between existing systems. And in fact, continuous auditing and continuous monitoring solution are usually a good way to integrate systems. Although I was expecting a little bit to go into into some answer like 6, the increased sophistication and complexity of transaction, or 1 as waste and process inefficiencies, but then it seems most of you are facing issues when it comes to integration within existing systems in your organization. So you have the data disparate across different systems. Okay. So the business, all organizations nowadays are faced with tremendous amount of challenges, and every transaction that an organization processes exposes it to a certain level of risk. Challenges can include increased complexity of transactions and operations, which is one a lot of people in the chat included as part of the challenges they are facing. Cybersecurity threats, so people might be afraid of attacks, cyber attacks occurring. It can be never-ending regulatory demands, and especially that the regulatory bodies will try to add more regulations to ensure people's interests are protected. But then again, that puts a great burden on organizations, especially financial institutions, that have to deal with a wide range of regulatory demands. Whether a new topic that is currently we're all facing supply chain disruption, whether it was due to pandemic that was happening, whether it was due to oil prices that went high. Again, all of that created some kind of disruption in the operations. Inflations and prices instability. As you can see, we're facing an increased amount of inflation recently. And this is a challenge that the organization face and will have to, let's say, see how it can overcome it or assess itself better. Whether it's manpower shortage, especially post-COVID, we're hearing about, they call it the era of people resigning and working from home and deciding whether not to continue physical jobs, but mainly to go into freelance. And we're witnessing a lot of manpower shortages in organizations across the world. Whether it's incidents of fraud and controls override, and manipulation and abuses of power within the organization. Or again, the issue of data available in disparate systems, and we don't have proper integration of when it comes to information. Information is not consolidated in one location. Or what we're all facing today, the higher velocity of information. All of these are challenges faced by organizations. These challenges, although some organizations try to protect themselves by implementing anti-fraud prevention and detection measures, include audits as part of their solution, includes process revisiting, includes other kind of risk assessment. But the problem with all of these are usually, first of all, they rely on samples, subset of transaction information that are not representative of the underlying issues. They only provide a snapshot on a specific moment in time, which result in a lot of vulnerabilities going undetected for a long period of time. And by its nature, traditional audit requires a long timeline to be executed. So it requires a lot of resources for it to be executed, whether it's manpower, it costs from the audit team would require a lot of manpower to be involved, or it would require time and effort from the actual business unit to prepare the data and to prepare the information. And last but not least, scarcity of audit resources limits the frequency and depth of audit visits that can be done on each activity. So although audit was used as somehow a solution, it wasn't an optimal solution. But then let's say audit becomes more frequent and audit becomes more intelligent, maybe by having continuous auditing in place or continuous monitoring, where the responsibility of audit moves not just from the internal auditors that are doing the work and doing the assurance services, but then moves also to management, where they get automatic notification of issues. They get automatic exceptions report. They have an overview of how business is operating. Leveraging on technologies such as AI, continuous auditing and monitoring, we can help solve these challenges faced by organizations. Although I'm not going to say that continuous auditing is intended to replace traditional auditing or traditional risk-based auditing, but then it provides a way to implement the regular audit visits that help enhance organization effectiveness, efficiency, into having them a little bit more frequent and having them more intelligent. So in general, continuous monitoring help organization in complying with existing laws and regulation and support achieving business goals. From a technical point of view, so the CCM or continuous control monitoring automate the process of monitoring transactions or processes or internal systems. So whenever an irregularity happens, it directly have a closed loop mechanism to identify it and to act upon it. So the value of continuous auditing or continuous control monitoring lies in the fact that we will have continuous assessment of internal controls that we put in place to overcome these challenges that we face. Whenever there is a high risk issue, it will be detected promptly. When it comes to decision making, when we need to take rapid decision, because we have an overview of the business, because we have a proper look on how this is operating, and we can know the areas of inefficiency, we can take better decisions and more rapid decisions. By just understanding that or identifying an irregularity as soon as it occurs, we reduce sometimes the recovery cost, or we eliminate it. And then by doing that, also, whenever we automatically detect items or instances as soon as they occur, we have the possibility of reducing the organization exposure to fraud, waste, or abuses. And then with all that, because there is an alignment when it comes to continuous control monitoring with management, so we can witness and improve the reporting between the management and the board. So in theory, again, continuous monitoring will have a great role and a great addition to organization. Then it's very important to understand how we can implement it properly and how can we use it properly. Which will bring us to our next topic, which comes to implementation of continuous control monitoring. But before that, I would like you to answer the second poll question, which is, in your opinion, what will be the derived benefit from implementing that? Whether it's prompt identification of process inefficiencies or irregularities, improved transparency / reporting between management and the board, transfer exception management responsibility to process owners and management instead of it being handled by audit, ensure compliance with applicable regulation, and reduce assurance and compliance costs. Please feel free to answer in the chat box.
We've got 3, 1, 1, 1, 1 and 2, 5, 1, 2, 1. So mainly it goes to 1.
So most of you says that this will help you promptly identify process inefficiencies and irregularities, which again is a very valid point. And mainly when we talk continuous control monitoring, this is the derived benefit that everybody thinks of. But then also other factors such as transparent exception, like the management of exceptions to the process owners, or improved transparency and reporting. And this will help the organization to overcome a lot of challenges on the long run. But then again, there is no wrong answer. It's all subjective to your opinion. So moving on, when it comes to continuous control monitoring implementation, we just need to understand that this is not just a technology that we need to adopt. It's a methodology, it's a way of acting and reacting, and it's a way of taking decisions. So it's more about understanding how business value can be derived from continuously assessing existing processes, risk controls, technology, and people. So it's not a solution for everything. We need to understand what are the current challenges, the current inefficiency that we need to continuously monitor them. What are the kind of activities that we need to continuously focus on and ensure they are falling within the desired limits or the desired thresholds. So to properly implement CCM systems or solution, we should follow a phased approach, such as it should start like by just identifying, by understanding the process, understanding how the process operates, understanding how the business operates, the technology adopted in the process, similar to just doing a risk assessment or internal audits. And then after that, we start defining some KPIs, some KRIs, some indicators, some transactions that we'd like to monitor and to assess. And then post doing that, we identify data that we can test or the data sources that we can rely on. And then just the technical part in it is developing the scripts themselves, which a lot of the scripts themselves will require the business acumen and the judgment of the user and the person who's managing the CCM implementation. And then post that, we need to establish what kind of reporting or what kind of exception that need to be reported and what kind of reporting we'd like to derive. And then after that, we need to test and ensure users' acceptance. So let me go through each phase in detail. So the first phase should be the process understanding phase. And here we can see that the person in charge or the project leader will have to conduct a series of meetings, workshops with different stakeholders to obtain better understanding about the scope, objective, and the business case and the business value that we'd like to derive from the solution. And once that is set, we can then move to gathering information to understand what kind of activities, processes, transactions that we'd like to cover within the scope of the CCM solution. So such information, after confirming the scope and the objective and business case with the stakeholders, we can start gathering the required information to understand the business, to understand the process, to understand the systems in place. And we can acquire such information from different sources, whether from SOPs that we have them, whether from manuals, flowcharts, management reports, or even it can be done through a series of workshops to better understand the business and to better understand the process being adopted. Ultimately, what we want to reach here is to be able to identify what kind of risks are faced by the organization or the business unit or the activity we'd like to monitor, and what are the actual controls in place for that. What kind of transaction is being processed, what kind of transaction that exposes higher risk to the organization. So all of that is part of the process understanding. After we do that, we start defining the indicators that we'd like to monitor. So a good approach is to start defining a library of KPIs, KRIs, and transactions to monitor for each business activity, subject to the scope of the continuous control monitoring. And when we do that, we need to take into consideration how frequent I'd like to test these indicators and how continuous I want them to have. A lot of information are just static for a long period of time, and then a transaction, for example, happens once a year, then there is no use of testing it on a regular basis, because yes, continuous auditing or continuous monitoring is just kind of scripts that being adopted on and mapped to the internal systems. but then these scripts will cost some investment, some time, some effort, and even some processing power to be processed. To determine the frequency of the test, we need to take into consideration the throughput. So the number of transactions being processed, the value, the materiality of the transaction being processed, the degree of automation that is currently in place. So if, let's say, every transaction is being processed on the system and the system is built with certain parameters, then maybe the frequency of the test can be less than manual process or process that involves dealing with external parties. And then the complexity of operation should be taken into determination as one of the factors to determine the frequency of the tests. Other factors might be considered. It's optional, but then just this is a sample of the consideration that can take place. Once the extent of tests are set, indicators are identified, and then we know what kind of test we'd like to do, what kind of analysis we'd like to monitor, we start identifying what are the available data within the organization and with the available systems, the available application that can provide us with the required information to monitor. So in this phase, usually it involves a coordination with the information technology teams, the system owners, system administrator, to identify, first of all, existing data sources that can supplement the data, to assess the credibility of these sources. So if the sources are being, the data in the sources are being protected from unauthorized amendment or editing, is there any kind of permission in place to prevent people from misusing the data on the sources or manipulating the data on the data sources. During this stage, usually during this coordination, the project leader or the person in charge will try to obtain the permission needed from relevant stakeholders to allow them access to the desired data sources, applications, and systems. So it's during that stage we define, okay, this is the data requirement that we need. This is the type of access that we want. Usually we should try to aim for a read-only access to the system so that the continuous monitoring tool does not amend or does not put the internal systems at any risk of manipulation of data. But then when we select an appropriate connection, and when I talk about connection is the integration between the software or the continuous control monitoring tool that we're going to use and the data sources, we need to take into consideration several factors, whether there is any issues with the network and the network traffic, whether how large is the data that we have. Do you have data that is huge, that requires significant amount of processing power to be communicated or connected? How sensitive is the information? Sometimes you see the information are very sensitive that you cannot even require direct access to it, and then we maybe add some kind of a data warehouse in the middle in order to integrate the data, the CCM tool with the data source. What kind of testing frequency is required? So let's say I'm doing the test once a year, then maybe the reports can be generated by the IT team or by systemly generated and sent once a year. It does not require direct integration with the system. All of that will be defined in that stage. Again, this will require to have the IT team involved, because they are usually, or the system owners involved, because usually they will have to give you or to grant you the permission to use this kind of data and data sources. Once we do that, we can move to the next step, which is a little bit technical, but then not that much technical if we think of it. So developing continuous control monitoring test scripts require a high degree of IT proficiency and require a little bit of scripting knowledge. But then the business acumen of the project leader, the knowledge, the judgment, will play a detrimental role in designing the actual analytic scenarios. So think of it as the traditional audit tests or the compliance checks. Again, they are straightforward. They just require a data source that we need to identify. We need to identify the objective that we'd like to reach, and then the type of testing we'd like to do. So the same thing we'll need to define whenever we do a CCM test, the type of test, the nature, and the objective. And then once we define the steps in an analytics perspective, we can then map it out to existing data sources, systems, and application within the organization. Once we do that, we can determine the parameters of the test and the thresholds that we'd like to adopt. So a simple question that needs to be answered usually in this stage is, what would the data look like if control objectives was not met? Or what will happen if these control objectives are not there? So it allows us to understand what kind of tests that we need to run. Tests can be then developed to look either for symptoms of exposures or to look for control deficiencies. For example, if we think about the control objective that require PRs to be authorized properly and then to comply within certain limits or certain budget, then these tests usually will be conducted in similar to the way compliance checks are done or audit tests are done, by comparing the files together and identifying whether the actual requisitions fall within these limits and within these predefined limits. Again, once we develop these tests, we need to take factors such as the sensitivity of the parameters and the thresholds and the quality of the analysis into consideration. At first, we might face a large number of exceptions being flagged, but then we need to start refining the test a little bit more to ensure that we get the proper result. Again, we don't want a high number of exceptions being reported, which in reality, they are not that much of an exception. So we need to find a balance in the middle in these exceptions. We need to make sure that we continuously refine the data, continuously refine the analytic scenarios before we start reporting them and before we go to the next stage. So a good example would be to do the actual test on your own first, to see the results and the outcomes of these tests, verify the authenticity of the results, and then after that, start deploying them on a continuous basis. I mean, it's critical to examine it's very critical to examine and assess the results, and such can be achieved through either verifying the authenticity of the data, checking if the data and the data sources are correct. Maybe it can be done through reconciliation, or it can be done through various checks and tests to verify the authenticity of the data, validating the timeliness of the information to check that the information we're testing are relevant to the area subjected by the test or the frequency subjected by the test, reviewing the fields. So sometimes you have the fields that are not synchronized properly. We have the date field sometimes written incorrectly. Sometimes we have the amounts or the numeric figures written as character or vice versa. Again, it's very important to refine these elements or cleanse these elements before we go into full execution of CCM solution. After we do that, we develop the test, we map them out across the different data sources, we can move to the next step, which is establishing a reporting mechanism. And when we talk about establishing a reporting mechanism, we need to take into consideration the stakeholders involved in these reports. So who's gonna, at minimum, I need to start asking myself, what kind of exception should we report? To whom shall they be reported? So who is involved from the organization? Who are the stakeholders involved? Every kind of exception should be reported to a person that can take action for it. So we don't just want to know about them, we need to take an action, and we need this exception to provide actionable insights for future remedial actions that can take place. How frequent shall they be reported? That's another question that we need to ask ourselves. So, okay, except we can do the test on a daily basis, for example, but then if we report something on a daily basis, a lot of time people will omit from seeing it. But then if we just omit high exceptions on an immediate basis, but then when it comes to regular testing or regular dashboards on a more larger periodicity, we can ensure people will be checking them and will be reviewing the results. In which form shall they be reported? And again, a big answer to that would be who is involved in reviewing the results of the exception. So when we, let's say, deal with finance professionals or auditors, maybe they would require a little bit more of the detailed transactions, such as the tables, such as the spreadsheets or the actual databases. But then when we go to management, and especially to higher management, they can a little bit prefer to see a dashboard or business intelligence dashboard that overview the whole processes and just gives a highlighted summary about the exception being noted. And last but not least, we need to answer this question to know how can we report and who should be allowed access to these reports. Is how sensitive is the information being reported. So let's say the information being reported can result in, for example, insider trading, then I need to make sure just to share it with the people that have clearance to do so. Or let's say if the issue relates to a bankruptcy of one of the divisions, then I need to make sure the people that are seeing that are either the regulatory bodies or the people that are authorized to see that. Based on these answers, based on the results that we can achieve, exception reports should be developed. They can be in form of dynamic business intelligence dashboards. They can be in form of email alerts, notification to process owners and relevant stakeholders. They can be customized reports on the exception identified. They can be, again, the exception database spreadsheets with complete details, or they can even be audit log files that can be shared with the audit team or the finance team. After we complete that, after we have established the reporting mechanism for the exceptions identified, we need to go to the next phase where we get user acceptance. And usually it's very critical to have an effective testing strategy to ensure successful implementation of CCM solutions. So usually it involves establishing the appropriate threshold levels and correctly configuring and building testing scripts that ensure that excessive number of false positives are not produced and resources are not used ineffectively. Again, we need to assign a responsible party that will be responsible to review such results and such exceptions, who is capable to understand how the business operates, so he can take better decisions to refine the tests and refine the analytic scripts themselves. It's also critical to monitor the outputs and assess the impacts of the findings to understand what can go next. What can, sometimes you might need to revisit some of your processes. Sometimes you might have to revisit some of the tests. Maybe you increase a little bit the depth of certain tests or reduce a little bit the depth of certain tests. Again, it's very important at this stage to ensure proper documentation of all the tests, all the scripts, and ensure proper storage of these resources, manuals, scripts, so that it can be properly handed over to other people within the organization. Doing so, ensuring that we go step by step in a phased approach when it comes to implementing a continuous monitoring solution, can help us reach the objective of whether reducing the inefficiencies, promptly detecting internal fraud, ensure compliance with certain regulatory requirements, or it can even help us achieve all the desired output. But then it's very important not to rush it, not to think of continuous monitoring as just a tool off the shelf that I can add it to my system and it can operate automatically. As you can see, more than 80% of developing a CCM solution or a CA solution requires business acumen, requires judgment from the people involved, whether it's the internal audit in a continuous auditing solution, or it is the management, the stakeholders involved in the business when it comes to continuous monitoring solution. Now I'll move to a practical implementation of continuous monitoring. So we'll take the procure to pay cycle as an example. But before that, we have a couple of poll questions to be answered. The first question is, in your opinion, what are the barriers of CCM adoption in your organization? So whether it's limited commitment from the board and management, lack of knowledge and expertise regarding data analytics and continuous monitoring, lack of human resources to support adoption of solutions, technical sophistication of existing solutions in the market, lack of a defined business case, or other reasons. So I can see the first answer is, I can see a lot of people add 2, lack of knowledge and expertise regarding data analytics and continuous monitoring. I can see lack of a defined business case.
Mainly 1 and 2, 1, 2, 2 plus 3, 2 plus 5.
So I can see the majority is 2,
1.
which is lack of knowledge and expertise regarding data analytics and continuous monitoring. The good thing is I'll show you today a little bit of a glimpse how we can do that. Personally, I'm not an IT expert, so I mainly, as you can see from my profile, I mainly worked in risk management, governance, internal audit, and a little bit of data analytics. But then when we develop CM solutions, as we said, a lot of it is related to business acumen, and the solutions that we have nowadays, whether internal audit softwares or the other RPA solutions that are available, are very easy to be deployed, or even the process mining solution are very easy to be deployed within the organization systems. And usually, as we said earlier, they are pre-built with library of tests that you can just plug and play when it comes to adopting the CCM solutions. Another core question I'd like to have your answer on is, how much will your organization, do you think, invest in continuous monitoring solution in the next 2 years? So is it your organization wouldn't invest? Is it below $50,000, $50,000 to $100,000, $100,000 to $50,000, or above that? So I can see so far in the range of
Less than 50,000.
less than 50,000.
Between 50 and 100. Less than 50. Less than million.
Less than million.
350 and 100.
I can see a 1. That's a very. I wasn't expecting to see a 1. So it's good that the majority of the people are going within the 50 to the 100,000 range.
Yes.
So below 50 to 100,000 range, which
yes,
again,
number 3.
Number 2 to 3, which again, if we talk about existing solutions that are quickly deployed to internal systems, usually they cost in that range. depending on how extensive you would like the continuous monitoring solution to be adopted, and how and the level of sophistication of your internal processes. But then when we talk about existing solutions that are just off the shelf, that do not require much customization, so we're talking something in that range. The last part of the presentation will be giving a little bit of a case, a business case. Let's see, to see how the business value can be derived from CCL. So the case background is the CEO of Food Cube Corporation, so a company that manages and operates multiple retail stores across the Middle East, has tasked you to lead a pilot project for developing and implementing a continuous monitoring solution over the P2P cycle, procure to pay cycle. The CEO believes that despite the heavy reliance on the company's ERP system, procure to pay remains an area prone to fraud, money leakage, and inefficiency. Again, he set for you the following objectives. The objective of the project is to deploy the analytics platform that provides insights into the overall health of procurement controls from the moment we request an item through the payment, detect exceptions, irregularity in a timely manner, and tracks anomalies from initial detection to resolution, and identify root causes of process inefficiency and bottlenecks in the operations. We were also informed that as part of our process understanding that a centralized procurement function is in place to process all requests received from the stores. Again, as you can see, the process is a little bit traditional. So we have the PR process, the goods requisition, which passes through the approval of the business unit manager and then the procurement before it goes to the PO stage, where the procurement team will collect the quotations and will process the PO, whether in forms of approving it and dispatching it to certain suppliers. Then once the PO is issued, the goods will be received, inspected, invoices will then be received, and then checked, reviewed against the goods received and against the POs requested. And then we will be paying for supplier payments. So again, a sample of key risks in these processes will include, let's say in the PR process, having duplicate PRs, processing duplicate PRs, processing incomplete or unclear PRs, purchasing non-required materials, material that we actually don't have a usage for that. In the PO cycle, maybe we have PO that do not match the PRs, duplicate POs, issuing POs to unapproved suppliers, splitting POs, so dividing multiple one PO into multiple POs to override certain limits, delays in processing the POs, and here we're talking a little bit about inefficiencies of operation. When it comes to goods receipts and inspections, so we can have mismatching items, mismatching quantities as part of the risks that are there, delays in submitting claims to suppliers. When it comes to invoice received, maybe we have errors in the invoice provided by the supplier, or let's say invoice made before the service receipt or before actually the order, which means that someone is just giving us this invoice to process it, but then the procurement process is not being adopted properly. We can have invoices that do not match whether the goods received or the purchase order. The next area is the supplier's payment. So again, in this area, we're mainly afraid to have duplicate payments, to have certain kind of favoritism to supplier, to paying to unauthorized individuals or to wrong accounts, paying wrong amounts, to be late in settling suppliers' invoices. And then the last area, which again is mainly about managing suppliers or managing the relationship with suppliers. So here we're afraid to have, let's say, two suppliers account within the organization, and just processing certain transaction in each account just to show that we're not having certain favoritism or certain element of relying on a sole supplier, dealing with an unreliable supplier, vendors with invalid information or wrong information, whether we're concerned about vendor-employee relationships. This is all part of the risks involved in the procure-to-pay cycle. On the other hand, as we know, there are certain controls in place that the organization have in order to overcome these risks and mitigate these risks. So for PR, for example, there is a review and approval process that ensures dual review of a PR. So the PR is prepared by the business unit employee, and then it's reviewed by his manager, or it's reviewed by procurement. And then it's reviewed again by the people responsible of procurement to ensure the clarity of information in the PR and the clarity of the request. If we're ordering non-required material, usually there would be a budget controller in place or a business unit head that will be comparing the budgets with the purchasing plan with the actual PRs received. When it comes to purchase order, again, there is usually dual reviews of POs. There is delegation of authority matrix that limits the approval to certain limits. There are some system controls to ensure POs are only to approve PRs. For goods received, usually there is the inspection process that's being done. GRN, the items included in the GRN need to match the PO and so on. Usually when it comes to claims, we need to make sure that we submit claims on time. This is part of to ensure that we're getting at least recovering the losses of damages or non-required items. Invoice, usually the most common control is three-way matching, when we match the PO with the goods receipt and the invoice. Usually there is again dual review of invoices. It's another control that is there. Usually the one who prepares it is not the same one who posts it on the system. So other controls might be in place to restrict invoice to only valid POs. Supplier payments, again, there is several review over the payment process. Sometimes to ensure that we're not late on supplier payments, there is a payment policy that needs to be adopted, usually 5 days to 25 days, depending on the organization, to ensure that we're not processing to wrong accounts. We usually process bank transactions or bank transfers, not cash payments. For vendor, usually there is some kind of periodic review of vendors, periodic assessment. There is kind of review of the information before it's being added and so on. All of these are controls, key controls when it comes to the procurement process. Now, getting this understanding of what are the key risks and the key controls, we will be developing a continuous monitoring tool by just doing the analytics tests and then automating them and then scheduling them for future tests. Again, because due to it is a pilot project, we were not provided access to the actual system. Instead, we were provided with the direct connection with instead of getting direct connection with the ERP, we're getting reports from the IT department that are coming from the systems on a regular basis, which we will use for this testing. Again, the reports that we were provided is the list of PRs, list of POs, list of GRN, payment process, vendor master file, employee master file. Let me go through a series of analytics tests. So let's start first of all with the PR process. So as we can see, we have multiple concerns when it comes to the PR process. We'd like to run some analytics tests, and from these analytics tests, we will be building these scripts themselves. So let me first show you the PR file. So this is the list of PRs. Usually we have the PR number, the item number. This is the list provided by IT, the quantity, the date, the store, prepared by, reviewed by. This is the data for January 2018. We were provided monthly reports, so January, February, March, so on. Again, we can see that we have this information from just the PR report. We can check whether there is a duplicate PR from this information. Duplicate can be on different criteria. One way of checking duplicates is checking if there is a duplicate PR. But then when we do the test, we need to define the key that we'll be using. Here, the PR number is the only key. And when we did that, we uncovered there is no duplicates in January 2018. This is, again, doing just the normal analytics test. But then when we refined the test a little bit better, and we identified that maybe the duplicate is not in the PR number, but then the duplicate might be resulting from an item processing the same item on the same date from the same store, for example. Maybe that we can be a duplicate. Why we didn't do them with one PO, why we process them into multiple POs, and then we're trying a little bit to override some kind of controls in place. So let's do this test. What we did is we defined that the common keys here are the item number that prepared by the user who is preparing it and the date of PR. Again, once we did that, we identified that there are some kind of exceptions to be reported. Again, I'm just going to carry forward with the test and then show you overall two test scripts. Other items that we can test here is whether PRs were reviewed or not. As we can see, some of the PRs were not reviewed. We can run an analytics script for that. And then we can run another analytics script for PRs prepared and reviewed by the same user. Again, which means that someone is overriding the control and is processing his own PRs. Once we complete all the tests, we should expect them to be in, one second. In this form. Usually a list of PRs that includes certain tests, which again, this is just the audit log of all the tests being done. So we can see what kind of result and what kind of exceptions being used. Once we have this exception, and the good thing about using a general audit software is by going and creating a macro of these results. So let's say I want to create a macro of the results of the PR testing. I will just create a script which will be something like that. Sorry. Will be something like that. It's a technical script. I know I'm not going to go into the details, but this script covers all the activities, all the testing activities that we've done for a specific month. Let's say we want to run the same script for other months. Usually, such process is an easy process. It's not that complicated. You just need to change the parameters. As you can see from the script will open list of PRs for January 2018. So my script does not include an import process. Let me open a more refined script. Let me show you this script. So we can see that the data source, the test is already mapped here to the data source. The data source is available in that project files. I've done the tests that I want. So one of the tests is to extract duplicates. One other test is to extract non-reviewed PRs or PRs that are reviewed by the same person. And by that, we can just create a variable, which is here, the month is the variable, and replace this variable with another month. And with that, you can just run the script immediately, and the test will be completed for the next month. As you can see, the same testing that we have done it on another month. This is an easy approach to automate anything, because once you know how to leverage on this technology, once you know what kind of test you can automate, then you can just run it automatically. So this is the PR process. Let's go to other areas of testing. The next area of testing that we can run to is the PO process. And the PO has a lot of tests, because here we're getting into a more, let's say, official or more formal area, where again, we're dealing with external parties. So it's a little bit more complicated. So again, I've imported the list of POs, which comes from a database from this is assistant generated database. We can see it has the PO details. And I can just run a series of tests on this list of PO without using other resources, just to build an understanding if there is any exceptions from these POs. Again, we're still talking about January 2018. So one of the first things I want to check if there is any duplicate PO, just by duplicate PO number. To do that, again, as we explained, we just define the key, which is here the PO number, the key that is duplicated among all. And we can see that there is two exceptions identified. Again, another element that we want to check is whether the same supplier has multiple POs on the same date. So I've done another test, but here it's a more refined test that we took into consideration the supplier number and the PO date and see if there is the same transaction on the same date. And to our surprise, we got 330 duplicate transactions when we did that. If we just use the duplicate PO number, we would have got two duplication, but then this is not an accurate estimate of the actual error being faced or the actual issue being faced. The actual issue is we're processing multiple requests to the same supplier on the same date with different amounts, sometimes with the different item. So why we don't process them all at once and benefit, let's say, from procurement saving when it comes to bulk discount, or to ensure that the controls are in place to limit, let's say, splitting POs or splitting invoices. Another issue that we can just check is, as we have the PR number linked to the PO report, we can check if there is a PO issued for non-approved PR or for non-existing PR. So again, we can see that here there are, with just an exception test, a range of 13 POs that are not related to any PRs. Again, the criteria of the test, I'm not going to go into the details, but then we built a relationship between the two databases to come up with this output. We can also build, as you said, we can build a relationship to understand if there is inefficiencies in the operation. So let's say there are delayed POs. And when we talk about delayed POs, we here talk about POs that are taking more than 15 days to be processed from PRs. Assuming that's the range within the organization, 15 days is defined in the SLA. We can also see if there is any kind of POs that were approved before the PR. Again, we can see that if this exists, this is a significant issue that needs to be addressed by the company. We can see if there is mismatching between the quantities denominated in the PRs and the quantities denominated in the PO. So sometimes there would be some differences. It's very important to understand these differences and the reason why these differences occurred. Sometimes it's just an entry error. So it's very important to assess why this entry error exists. This is when it comes to the POs. Again, similar to what I've done for the PR process. I can just go here to the project overview, define my tests, define a macro for my tests, and use it for future tests. So again, I can see here, these are all the tests I've done on the PO. You see how fast I've done these tests because again, I'm aware of what I want to do. I'm aware of the procurement cycle, so I know what kind of exception I would like to test. And again, you can see that most of these tests are common sense. It's just the adaptation of the technology to be able to do these tests. A sample of the script will be something like that, which is very important to try to maintain a proper arrangement of the scripts. And it will include, again, the source of the information, the kind of test you'd like to run, and the frequency here, the month of that I would like to run the test on. A very important, when developing such a script, is very important to ensure the standardization when it comes to the names of the files. So you can see here, I've tried to standardize as much as possible the names to January 2018 or to February 2018, making sure that the file names are correct. And this point of ensuring the standardization of information is critical, even when we're trying to deal with IT departments. So when we're doing that with IT department, we need to ensure that the reports being generated from the systems or the reports that we can generate have the same, let's say, names and have standardized names. This is very important when it comes to managing the projects themselves. Again, this is part of the PO. We've done certain tests. We identified certain exceptions in January 2018. If I want to run them again for February, I can just rerun the script, just change January to February. For the goods receipt note, again, I was provided with a list of GRN issued. What I want to do now is to assess whether the goods received were matching the PO actually. So I can do this kind of test, GRN versus PO, by just using a joining tool similar to the VLOOKUP. So I combine the two databases into a single database, define what kind of test I want to know. Here, my test is to identify mismatched quantities or mismatched items. So I can see that there are one mismatched item between the PO and the actual goods receipt. So the mismatching item is the following. You can see the difference between the item number. And then the mismatching quantities, we can see there is a wide range of mismatching quantities. Some of them, you can see there is here the claim column, were claimed back from the supplier, some of them were not. So if we want to identify the ones that were not, we're just gonna isolate them and get a resulting file that will have the non-claimed quantities. So here we can see there are 43 non-claimed, and we were late in claiming them within 3 days. And there were these kind of 10 that were claimed, but then we were also late in claiming them. Thus, we lost the ability to recover the losses. This is when it comes to the goods receipt note. I'm not gonna automate it now. I'm just going to move forward to the invoice. For the invoices, we've done, again, ranges of tests. So we have combined the list of invoices with the POs to identify the invoices that are not related to POs. So we can see these invoices. We have 72 invoices out of 400 that are not related to POs. These invoices is very important to exceptionally monitor them while we are processing them. I can see that most of these invoices are relating to transport, logistics. So maybe I'm not adopting the proper procurement process in this area. So I need to make sure to adopt the procurement process in this area properly. Again, other items might include list of, while we combine the list of invoices with the GRN, we can identify the invoices that are received before the goods are received. So here, by just doing a small comparison test, by checking whether the receipt date is before the invoice date or it's after the invoice date, or checking that the PO date is before the invoice date or after the invoice date, we can identify some exception that we can report later on. For payment, we can have a variety of tests to assure whether the payments were done properly, whether the payments were properly processed or not. Again, here we can see the list of payments with vendors. We combine them with the vendor master file to identify whether proper bank details were like the amounts were transferred to the proper banks. So this is the vendor master file. It includes bank details. It includes the email, it includes the postcode, the address, the supplier name, and the supplier code. So while linking them together, we can see that here we have 11 suppliers where the bank account details are not matching between the vendor master file and the actual payment document. These ones are exceptions. These ones are to be reported as exceptions and highlighted. Other elements that we have tested also is whether there is payments outside the policy range. So payments that were done, whether early payments before 5 days or late payments that are after 25 days. These are also areas that we can identify, assess, and measure. And last but not least is to check the vendor master file, to check the validity of information there. So here we have the date of creation and the date last updated. So as per the policy of the company of FoodCube, the supplier details should have been updated on an annual basis. So we've done an exception test to check whether they were updated, whether this control was working or not. So we can see here some delays in updating supplier details. And we can see that these, we have seen that the same person, there was no dual review, the same person has created the supplier file and has approved it or reviewed it, its addition. And all of that are part of the analytics tests. What I will be doing now is I will be creating a reporting mechanism, how I want them to be reported. For the time being, I would just report them as, let's say, the delayed claims. I would report them directly by email, send them to, as a PDF file to, let's say, the procurement department. Other files, I can report them, export them to further analyze them. Other reports can be done. Other reports can be exported into different format, whether I want to export them to Excel, I want to do some kind of dashboards of them. So I can easily go to the delayed claims, define them in a dashboard using the dashboards tools that I have, and then report this result accordingly. What I will be doing now is I will just be automating the tests in front of you, and we will be repeating them, scheduling to repeat them for other periods. So let's say we've done them now for January 2018. We will be revisiting these tests for other periods such as February 2018, March 2018, and so on. So it's very important while we do this process of automation to ensure, first of all, that we're going in sequence of the tests that are being conducted. So that, as you remember, the first thing we've done is the PR cycle. So we don't want the scripts to overlap themselves. So again, I'm following now the PR cycle. After we've done the PR cycle, we've imported the master file. I don't want to import it again. I don't need to import it again. After the PR cycle, I need to move to the PO cycle. So I had tests that are related to POs processed before PR approval or delayed POs and so on. I had the other tests. Again, you can see how easy it is. The fact I'm automating them, I'm just going to the history of the project and automating it. I can see if there is some kind of exceptions, how they are being reported. Again, after the PO was issued, next thing, the goods were received. So I will be selecting the tests that are related to goods receipt. And then after that, I will be uploading the tests related to invoices. So I will be adding the invoices details. You can see the system will give me some error message and warnings until I complete my testing. So it's here warning me that not all the tasks that you have done on the node are completed. So some tasks were not done. It's very important to follow the process again as you have done them so that the scripts don't overlap each other. Next thing is the payments. Again, the payments will include wrong payments, payments outside the policy range. And the last things that we have checked is delays in updated supplier details. Again, all of that, I will create it as a script. And I have this script ready to use it for further automation. What I can do here, after I've created the script, I can take the script, just add a little bit of a tweaking. And then replace everything that has January with February. And save, sorry, let's replace all. You can see how automated everything is being done now. And then once I've done that, I can save this script. I call it February tests. After I save the script, I have to do something to build this script as a separate application. So these are February tests. It's an executable file on its own. And then what I have to do here is just go to macros, go to the library section, and then see these February tests. I can schedule them. I'm having some issues with the administrator rights. Usually I can schedule them here, or I can just close IDEA. Let's go through the task scheduler that we have here, or I mean, you can go for a more sophisticated RPA tool, whether it comes to UiPath or something, but then just, I want to show you how easily it's being done. What you have to do is to create a basic task, name the task February tests, and then the trigger of this test is, let's say, weekly, monthly, daily, or when the computer starts, and so on. For this time, we're just going to do it for one time. I'll specify for it to be done within 2 minutes. And the action would be to start a program. And just as simple as we go through the program, the executable file that we've done. Again, the executable file is here. And this is the executable file. You can see IDEA is not operating. That's it. You can see this is scheduled as part of the automated things to be done by the computer. I can develop monthly tests, weekly tests, and all of that. I just need to schedule them and to schedule their frequency, and they will be operated immediately. If we just don't want to wait, I will run the test automatically. And you can see what will happen is IDEA will open on its own. We'll do the tests, we'll import the required files. We'll do the test for February. We'll complete all the tests. And we'll report the results immediately as I want them to be reported. So all of that, we can reach to the fact of continuously monitoring our test, continuously monitoring the procure to pay cycle. You can see here, this is complete tests of the procure to pay cycle. We've tested all the areas by just automating the tests that were done once, and we got the results eventually. We just get back to the PowerPoint. Again, as we said, define the actual phase of doing the tests and doing the scripts is not a complicated issue. Just require business understanding and business acumen. You see how it was not that hard to do the tests. You just need to develop the periodicity of the test, the type of test that you want to do, and then the type of script and scenario, and you can run it automatically. You can use more sophisticated tools when it comes to exporting data from system and building connection. But then for this exercise, we were a little bit using extracted reports. So from system generated reports. So therefore, it was a little bit much easier, the connection, but then it can go more complicated depending on the system used. Very useful integration can be either done through ODBC connection. So the connections, it's a connection tool to connect with Oracle databases and with SQL. And then for SAP integration, usually there should be some kind of API that helps integrate with SAP and with its different modules. Again, I hope it was an easy demo. But before I leave you, I just, there is one more poll question. And after that,
Hesham?
Yes.
Before we go to the poll question, we have some questions in the chat box. What is the name, if we can respond to them? What is the name of the tool that you are using, and could it be implemented to any ERP system?
Yes, the name of the tool is Caseware IDEA. It's a general audit software. And regarding your second question, can it be implemented to any system? Yes, it can. ERP system, so it can build integration with SAP, with Oracle, with SQL, with any kind of data source, whether it's directly with specific reports or with servers. Again, IDEA can get the data and analyze it. There's another question, I think. Would it be the same if the control system is integrated with the ERP system? Yes. The only difference here is the reports were generated. The only difference would be the access permissions. So if I have, as a user, access permission to certain information, by defining the connection, by building the connection, which is something as similar as I can show you before I can leave the PowerPoint 1 second, just to show you how easy it is. So to build the connection, you just need to go through the ODBC, define where the data is residing. Let's say it's in SQL. You create the store, you define where is the location of the data. If it's a machine, what kind of machine it is, and then you click OK, and then you can access the data automatically. SAP will require a little bit of an additional tool to do that, an API, which we can, if someone is interested, I can explain it later on. I can, can you please write the name? Yeah, Caseware IDEA. Before we conclude, there is just one poll question that I'd like to have your opinion on, which is which function shall be responsible you believe in managing, leading continuous monitoring initiative in your organization? So far, the answer that I've received is internal audit. I received one answer that IT and CEO office, I think.
Mainly number 3, internal audit.
And I saw one internal control.
Again,
yes. I wouldn't say internal audit should be responsible of continuous monitoring, although they should be involved in it. I think having a separate function for internal control can be useful, but then I think it should be, we shouldn't have just one owner for continuous monitoring, but then multiple users, multiple stakeholders, each one responsible for his or her area. Again, internal audit, because their access to information and the right to access certain data, they are better positioned than other functions for the time being to manage and lead continuous monitoring initiatives. Before I leave you, I just have some few takeaways to proper implementation to ensure that we properly take CCM and implement it in our organizations. The first thing, start with smaller pilot project. Don't try to make it complicated. Don't try to go for larger projects. Again, it's very important to realize the benefit and the business value to get before you get going on other areas. So a good example would be to start it on 1 or 2 cycles. Let's say procure to pay or to cash. These are standardized cycles before you fully deploy it on the whole organization. The next thing is involve and align stakeholders early on, and especially at the start of the project. Make them responsible or make them feel responsible, get them involved from the beginning, because again, their involvement, their actions toward the exception is what makes the continuous monitoring tool successful. The third thing is investigate whether you can leverage on existing IT solution or softwares. Before you invest additional amount on new softwares, check whether your existing systems can do such things. And again, as you can see, some basic tools such as scheduling that is available inside of our Windows or our Microsoft, added with certain analytic scripts, we can build our own mini continuous monitoring solution. It can get more sophisticated, but then we will need to assess later on after realizing the business value for it. Train a dedicated champion within an organization and don't just rely on having an IT provider, solution provider to just give you this tool as an off-the-shelf tool. Again, important time the testing results. It's very important to interpret the result, the scenarios, update them on a regular basis. And last but not least, integrate so whether there is some kind of financial management reporting or some other kind of report, try to have the continuous monitoring tool as part, the exceptions, generated from this tool as part of this report. And now we can, if you have any question, please feel free to ask it in the chat box.
Thank you, Hesham, for the great webinar. Thank you all for attending. Please feel free إذا حدا عنده أي سؤال بحب يبعته على chat box directly أو unmute yourself or go ahead. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thank you all. عم يوصلنا كله thank you notes. Mr. Hesham, can you please share with us the presentation?
Sure. we will share it with you.
Yes, once received, I will share it with the attendees, inshallah. And we already recorded this session. You will find it on our YouTube channel, inshallah. I will let you know all. Thank you all. عاد ما في أسئلة. Thank you, Mr. هشام, عن جد لوقتك وجهدك معنا.
Welcome anytime.
Inshallah, looking forward for more events, webinars, workshops. So see you all, inshallah, in our upcoming workshop. Thank you all.
You.
تسلم. أهلا. Bye bye.
Bye bye.